Hi guys, it's me, Mr. Wilson, and I'm back with chapter 18 of Guardians of the Taiga. Okay, so we are down to 3 chapters left. Let's see if they save this moose. But first, I gotta say thanks to StacyPlays and Harper Publishing for letting me read it to you. Okay, chapter 18. Stacy looked up at the frightened moose. His antlers were still covered in velvet and had a couple of points on each side. "Why, you're just a yearling," Stacy said softly. "It's all right, we won't hurt you. We're here to help." The moose shifted in place, panicked in his eyes. His grunts got louder and more insistent. The wolves lowered themselves to the ground in a gesture that said, "We're not here to attack." "They won't hurt you," Stacy said, putting her hand on the moose's side. She could feel his bare bones. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" she asked. She poured some water into her hand and held it close to the moose's mouth. His small antlers were so tightly entwined in the veins that the poor thing could barely even lower its head to drink or eat the vegetation all around him. He lapped up every drop of water and looked all around Stacy's arm, searching for more. "I don't even want to know what kind of messes I'd get into if I had antlers and started growing out of my head," Stacy said sympathetically to the moose. That simple act, giving the moose water, was all Stacy needed to earn his trust. The trust extended to the wolves, too. The moose stopped its nervous prancing and stood quietly, as if he knew they were about to rescue him. Even though it was just a little over a year old, the moose towered over Stacy. She had to stand on Basil's back and hold her torch high to get a good look at the vines. In his attempt to get away, the moose had gotten himself even more tangled. It was going to take a while to cut away the thick vines. She gently climbed onto the moose's back and reached into her pack for a hunter's knife in its leather pouch. But one look at the entangled vines told her it would take hours for her to do this job on her own. She needed an extra set of hands. Or teeth. "I'm going to work on the vines closest to the antlers," Stacy told the others. Addison and Tucker, can you chew through the others? Maybe we can untwist some." She used a loose vine to tie the torch firmly to a branch just over the moose's head and got to work while Addison and Tucker tried to chew through some of the vines. All of a sudden, Stacy heard a crunching noise in the distance. It was growing louder by the second. She looked up from the vines. "Everest, what is..." Suddenly another moose came into view, crashing through the scrub oak and suddenly running directly towards Stacy. It was bigger than the moose Stacy was attempting to rescue. It didn't have antlers, though, so it was able to flatten the force as it barreled towards Stacy in the pack. "Is it the moose's sibling? Or worse, its mama?" "Get back!" Stacy yelled to the wolves and Paige. Basil and Tucker, Addison and Paige darted away, but Everest ran towards Stacy, positioning himself directly in front of the charging moose. "Everest, no!" Stacy braced herself for impact, but the moose pulled up just inches from where Everest was standing. It snorted wildly and then retreated. "It's going to charge again," Stacy shouted. "She doesn't know that we're trying to help. Basil, Everest, you've got to try to distract her. Everyone else, start chewing." Everest Basil sprung into action, nipping at the moose's legs to confuse her and get her to stop charging. It wasn't the kindest method of subduing the powerful creature, but it worked and gave Stacy and the others the time they needed to free the yearling. Paige was draped over the moose's back, furiously gnawing through the vines at the base of his antlers. Addison was perched on a low branch just at his shoulders, methodologically untangling the vines, and Tucker was working with the moose's hooves and also licking the leg wounds that the moose had gotten while trying to free himself. The vines were thick and strong, and Stacy's hand began to cramp with the effort. After several minutes, they managed to cut through the thickest vines, and Stacy began to unravel and untwist. At last, he had just one or two small vines wrapped around the base of his left antler. "I'm going to leave those," Stacy told him. "I don't want to cut you, and you're going to shed your antlers in the winter anyways. The vines that are left aren't going to hurt you." The moose cocked its head at her, not understanding. "You're free now," Stacy told him, rubbing her cramped fingers. The moose blinked in surprise, shook his head, suddenly understanding it could move. It immediately lowered its head and started to eat the vegetation on the ground. Stacy swung her leg around and did the slide on the moose's neck and hopped off. Everest and Basil each took a step back from the moose that had charged Stacy. The two moose walked toward each other and then disappeared together in the dense forest. Exhausted, Stacy leaned against Basil and drew the others around her. Thanks, everyone, she said with a yawn. You've been amazing. She closed her eyes for a second, wondering if she had the energy to begin the long journey home. She was so tired and she felt dizzy and was beginning to dream while she was awake. I know the forest is not the nicest place, she said, but I think we need to rest here for a couple of hours before we start home. The others were just as tired as she was. Even so, Stacy noticed that Everson Tucker stayed awake and formed a kind of barrier around her when she curled up next to Basil. The last thing she remembered before drifting off to sleep was Addison looking west with a fierce expression as if she expected something to come from that direction. The forest was so dark that when Stacy woke up, she had no idea how long they'd slept, and whether it was day or night. She was the last to wake. Everson and Addison were standing over her, holding the water canteen and a handful, or rather a pawful, of wild huckleberries. The moose were still nearby. Stacy could hear them munching on some tall grass. Everson nudged Stacy to her feet. I guess you're both in a hurry to leave, she said to Everson and Addison, then took a long drink and stuffed all the berries into her mouth. I agree. Let's get out of here. The journey down the mountain was easier, but felt longer. Even though the forest was dark, Stacy knew it would be morning. It must be morning. She was nervous about returning to the cave in broad daylight. What if the hunters were around, looking to cash in on the bounty? What if maybe they should wait until nightfall to return? They were just coming out of the forest of perpetual darkness to a cluster of bats appeared and started whizzing around Paige again. We do not have energy for another rescue right now, Stacy thought. The bats flew off and Paige made some frantic motions to the wolves, who seemed to understand. All at once, everyone started sprinting towards the taiga. Basil circled back to Stacy and lowered her head, a signal for Stacy to climb on. What's going on? Stacy yelled, but then she saw it. Light up ahead. By the height of the sun, she guessed it was late morning. There's daylight. But her voice caught in her throat when she saw in the far distance, beyond the swamp, their taiga. It was too far away to make out the details of the ridge and the cave below it, but not so far away that Stacy couldn't see the thick smoke hovered over the treetops. Fire! So that's the end of chapter 18. So just as they get out of trouble in one chapter, they enter a whole new trouble going into a next. Okay, so now we have 2 chapters left until we finish this book. Okay, I hope you guys are enjoying it. I miss you so much. I will see you in the next video. Bye.